Hello and welcome to another edition of ShellBlack Whiteboard, and we're going to explain another aspect of Salesforce and provide some pro tips along the way to get the most out of the Salesforce platform. I'm Shell Black, founder and president of ShellBlack.com and Salesforce MVP, and in this episode we're going to tackle a big topic. It's workflow, and we're going to break this into two segments because it's a big topic. So we're going to get in this segment, we're going to talk about what is workflow, what can it do for us. We're going to talk about some of the criteria of what we have to do to make it fire. And then in the second segment, we're going to talk about the actions that can occur either real time or time delayed that can fire off if your workflow kicks off. So with that, let's talk about what is workflow and what can this do for my organization. So let's say that we're a salesperson and we've won a deal and we've got some things that we got to do as a result of winning an opportunity. Maybe I've got to notify my boss. Maybe I need to assign a task to sales operations. Maybe I need to send an onboarding welcome email to my customer. If I'm winning multiple deals a day, I'm spending a lot of time communicating and sending information and assigning tasks to other users. Wouldn't it be great if all I had to do was win my opportunity in Salesforce, click save, and have the system send out these tasks and emails for me? That's what workflow can do. Workflow is essentially an automation engine, and it notifies people when they need to get involved. So maybe you have legal counsel. So instead of legal counsel having to run a report to look at the opportunities by stage to see if they need to do something, workflow can bring them in real time or time delayed into a business process and pull out some of that lag time between the actions of records being updated in Salesforce. So again, workflow is about accelerating your business processes. It's an automation engine. You're going to define when they trigger, but when they do trigger, you can do 4 different things with workflow. You can create a task, so either to the owner of the record or another user. They have to be a user in Salesforce. You can send an email to an email field in Salesforce like the contact, or an email to someone in the organization that has a Salesforce license. You can do a field update. So if this field is populated and this pick list is this populated, maybe you want to update a date field with today's date, something like that, a field update. You can also send an outbound message, and that would be a one-way fire and forget notification to a third-party system. So maybe you have an integration or you need to notify someone outside or a system outside of Salesforce that something occurred. And we'll get in more about the particulars about these actions in our next segment, but I just want to highlight what will happen. So you can fire these actions either real time or you can delay them. So 30 days out, 180 days out, whatever you want to do. And we'll talk about the methods to do that in segment 2. You can fire workflow off of standard objects, so your leads, accounts, contacts, and opportunities, or your custom objects. And you can have multiple workflow rules fire as a result of criteria being met. So if you win a deal, you can have multiple things happen. This is a feature that's available in Enterprise Edition or higher. And this is one of those big features that a lot of people use to upgrade from Professional Edition to Enterprise Editions to get this business automation. Let's see. One thing that workflow will not do is create a record. At least not today, it won't create a record. And last thing to kind of think about when you're looking at workflow, everything that you need to evaluate to make sure it fires, or the criteria, must be available on the record being saved. So you can pull some information in from some parent records, or if there's a direct lookup off that record, you can use some formula fields to pull information back to the record. It will not evaluate child records. So if you have records in a related list, it's not going to look at your related list and determine if something needs to fire. When you save that record, everything that you need to trigger off of must be on that record. So let's get into the criteria. And Salesforce breaks criteria up into kind of two buckets. So they have a bucket called evaluation criteria, and that's when, or the timing. And the things that you can check are when the record's created or saved. And then you have some criteria based on fields and some other logic called rule criteria. So let's go back to evaluation criteria on when it checks the record to see if it needs to do something. So there's a couple of instances that we have, and I'm going to go through these in detail because they're a little confusing. So the first option that Salesforce gives you is record creation. Very straightforward, only happens once. Hit the new button, create my record, hit save. That's when it's going to get evaluated. So this happens once. It's a fire once type thing. I'll talk about that here in a second. And the second option is created, and every time it's edited. So this one can actually fire multiple times. So if I edit a record and I save it and my field logic or whatever I'm using for my criteria are true, it's going to send my actions that I talked about earlier, my emails, my tasks, my field updates. If I edit the record again and hit save, all those actions are going to happen again. If I hit edit and save again, as long as the criteria is in place, this one will fire multiple times if you select this option. So be very careful with that because it can get annoying to your other users if you're not using it correctly. So the third option is if a record is created and anytime it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. What they're really trying to say is this is going to fire once. So if all the other field criteria are in place, the record gets evaluated, it's going to fire once. If you hit edit again and hit save, it's not going to continue to fire. So option 1 is a fire once. Option 2 is a fire multiple times until it doesn't meet the criteria. Option 3 is fire once with the criteria. You can continue to edit and save. It's not going to continue to trigger. Okay, so this is when the record gets evaluated. And let's talk about the rule criteria. And Salesforce gives you 2 options for rule criteria. So the first one is a little wizard, and if you've ever created a view in Salesforce, and I got a tutorial on how to create views in Salesforce, but basically it's a pull-down kind of declarative button-click interface. You pick your name of your field, you pick an operator for that field, and an operator would be equals, less than, greater than, contains, starts with, and then the value. So it could be, this date equals today, or this dollar amount is greater than this figure, and you can have multiple fields in this. So it's a wizard, so you can have, say, 10 or so fields being evaluated. You can also use and or logic. So if these two are these value, or this field is this value, you can trigger. It's a very simple interface, and it's really easy to get comfortable with that. Sometimes you need to create a formula or write a formula for the rule to fire. And a lot of times this happens when you want to compare one field against another. This kind of declarative button click format doesn't let you say if this date is compared to this date. It doesn't give you that comparison option. If you write a formula, you can do things like a comparison. You can write calculations. So if these two numbers added together is greater than 1,000, maybe that's what makes it fire. And the other thing you can do with a formula is you can kind of check if something's changed on a record. And there's 2 little formulas that you can use, or 2 operators that you can use. One is called isChanged, and one is prior value. So one checks to see if a value's changed, if a pick list value has changed, for example, and prior value checks to see what the prior state of that field was before you hit saved. Those work really well with number 2, and that's the only time that you can use one of those change in states, either prior value or isChange. Those formulas work with option number 2 because it will evaluate that. You can't use that on created, and you can't use that on number 3. You can only use that change in state or looking for something changed if you set it to number 2. So with a combination of these 2, when it fire, and then the criteria, or when do you want it evaluated in the criteria to see if it should fire, then you can have your actions kick off. So with that, I'm going to pause right there, and since we've talked about what workflow is and the criteria of what makes it fire, in the next segment we're going to talk about the actions a little bit more in depth, how they trigger real-time or time delayed. If you have any feedback for us, you can reach out to us a couple different ways. You can hit us on email, whiteboard@ShellBlack.com, or you can hit me on Twitter, Shell_Black. On Twitter, I would love to hear your comments, and check out the next segment on workflow actions.